for Newbies live show and podcast. I'm Tom Burton. I'm here with my good friend Brandon Lee and co-host, and our special guest today, Brian Galicia from Microsoft. Hey, Brian. And I know Carson will be coming here momentarily, I'm sure. He always likes to make a grand entrance. So he'll be here, and he'll be here in a second. Hey, before we start, and Brian, I know you're going to take us today through kind of a day in the life of social selling, and we're really excited to hear. I know you've got a big background and do a lot with this, but we've kind of got a little bit of a theme going here with movies on our show here.
Yes.
And I wanted to start with a little movie trivia here, and I'm going to hopefully see that this works. Give me 1 second. So I'm going to bring up a picture here.
Okay.
Can you guys see that?
It'd be challenging here. Let's see if I can actually do this.
No, I'm not putting that on.
Can you put that up? There we go. There we go. So this picture is from Back to the Future. This is from the cafeteria show or cafeteria scene in Back to the Future. So the trivia question is, who is that co-star there with the circle around him?
Geez.
Who is that?
And wow. I can't even hazard a guess. I have to do some. I mean, of course.
No, it's not Brad Pitt. I don't think it's Tom Cruise.
No.
Actually, believe it or not, it is our co-host Brandon Lee.
Does this help?
It is Mr. Brandon Lee. The ears. Can you? So
you need to put that on your Twitter, on your LinkedIn profile, Brandon. That you're famous. Like, hey, you were part. You were part of Back to the Future. I mean, that's a big deal. Look at you right there. You got your claim to fame. That's pretty cool. Like in the IMDb or if you don't have if someone types it in and they look at movie people in it, like your name needs to be plastered over the Back to the Future thing.
Yeah, that's just not going to happen. But I mean, I would love to think of it. You know, I got to be there for a couple of days and I got to be on the set, but that was about the extent of that.
Wow, that's a big claim to fame.
I can't believe you brought that up, Tom.
Well, I thought it was really good movie trivia. And one of my favorite scenes or lines in there was when he says, "Why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?" And Brandon, I remember you saying, yeah, that was my favorite line, other than the fact I had to listen to it 150 takes or something along the way. So,
words of wisdom by Biff. Yes.
Yeah. Jeez. Well, oh my gosh.
Thank you for bringing that up, Tom. That was sufficiently embarrassing. I appreciate that.
Now we got to dig up what other movies is Brandon a part of that we don't know about. So,
A Star is Born, right? So we have to do that. So anyway, all right, enough movie talk. Let's get into our show today. So Brian, why don't you start off? Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your role, and then we'll talk a bit more about the day in the life of social selling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing familiar names. So encourage everyone on this live stream to make comments. This is an interactive show. As you watched Brandon and Tom and Carson, thanks Carson for joining. We want this to be interactive. We want this to be a learning opportunity for everyone. And so please make comments in the LinkedIn feed. We'll definitely have an opportunity where I'm seeing them in real time. So there's an opportunity for me to comment on something. If it's something that we're talking about really sparks attention. So thanks, Dave, for the comment on Brandon went back to the DeLorean. I'm like, yeah, he definitely has. He's gone back and he's come back with some words of wisdom. So I'm Brian Galicia. As you see on my LinkedIn, I when I do these types of shows, I always want to make sure that people have some type of engagement. Some of you, I looked at who was actually registering. I think I'm just looking at the feed. We had 64 attendees from Microsoft, at least said that they were going to go watch it. And so it's a combination of who Carson knows, who I know. And so we appreciate Microsoft people having some interest in this conversation because I think it's super valuable. And if you're not doing it, not to say you can't be successful, because as Carson can attest to, there are salespeople that are amazing. They're just really good at what they do, but they don't do this. And I always have a mind-blowing experience going, oh my gosh, imagine if you did this. You would be even like rock star status, even more so. So the opportunity for me to share this insight. So I've been at Microsoft 16 years. I used to be a field seller like Carson in what we called the business application dynamic space. So all things related to business applications, think customer relationship management, CRM, think enterprise resource planning, ERP. And of course, CRM, if you're a seller, That might be a bad word, but if used properly, it actually works. And you tie that into the other tools. I know there's other questions we'll ask. That's so valuable. So what do I do at Microsoft? So I'm very grateful. I have the opportunity to actually drive value in selling, but with our partners. And so for people who may not be in the software industry, you'll hear this term ISV, independent software vendor. And all that means is that you have other big software companies or even small software companies that make a decision to say, I want to partner with Microsoft to grow our businesses together. There has to be a mutual benefit. And anyone who's in partnerships, you can imagine we sell too. Even though we have a partner role type, etc., I view myself as a seller. I encourage my team, you have to act like a seller, because what you're trying to do is two things. One, I'm trying to recruit other partners who may be working on other platforms to work with us. But the other side is we also have very well-established partners that we're trying to drive opportunities. And so Carson, in the healthcare space, we have tremendous amount of partners that do that. How do we then do it together so that we make a mutual benefit? So the one takeaway I'll say is that with LinkedIn, if you're not using LinkedIn effectively, I'm glad you're listening to this conversation and this whole podcast, because I started to see what Carson was doing with you, Tom and Brandon. You're at the right place, because there's so much stuff that people can be doing that they don't do at all. And think of it as a growth opportunity to learn. This does not happen overnight. That's the one caveat I will say. People go, oh, I did it, Brian. Like, how come all this stuff isn't happening? I know I look younger, but I've been getting older. And what I found out is, like, when you decide you want to work out, you're not going to see results in 1 week. Impossible. I'll just say that is people who think that, oh, I'm going to go to the gym and magically lose all this weight and be healthy in 1 week. It does not work. The theme that you'll hear in my conversation is consistency. If you take the best practices of things we'll talk about, but in particular, Carson, Brandon, Tom, they're just as much of authority. I'm going to learn a lot from them. If you think about the techniques and things we talk about and you do it consistently, high probability you're going to see change. So thank you I know there's a long-winded introduction, but hopefully I gave you some context too.
And just to clarify, Brian, so part of your job is twofold, right? Is to recruit new partners and then also make sure and enable those partners are successful, right? So you kind of have a 2-layer model on the whole thing there that you're having to deal with, and you're using social for both of those things.
Absolutely. And when we talk about social, I'll really define what does that mean, because social gives this moniker. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're spending 100% of your time on LinkedIn. And I don't, especially if you're a sales leader like Carson is, and I used to be, that gives a negative connotation, because people think, oh, you're just kind of like, they view it as, oh, you're like on Facebook 100% of the time. Yeah. Not really.
Yeah.
You're using it as a signal, as a tool. If you use the tool properly, guess what? You're going to have the outcomes you want. But if you use the wrong tool, or you use the tool ineffectively, guess what? You're not going to see the outcomes that you want to see.
Yep, totally. Well, let's jump in, gentlemen, and start asking some questions here of Mr. Brian. Carson, I'm sorry you missed it. We had a movie trivia of Back to the Future before you got there, and we picked out one of these stars, the co-stars in the cafeteria scene. So you might know who that.
Yeah,
who that
I know there's some great future rising stars that are in that scene. There was a kind of a fresh-faced kid, turning his head around. I wonder where that guy is today. I feel like a kid in a candy store here, because I'm a Brian fanboy. I have been my whole time at Microsoft. So this is awesome for me. And everything you're saying, Brian, I'm tracking with 1,000%. And you know what? What's interesting is no matter what role you're in, wherever you are, you need to create relationships. And so whether it's solving problems of, hey, I need more pipeline, or it's I need to recruit, you can use these tools to find people. And that's what I love. But what I get a lot, and this is what I'd love your take on, is people say, you know what, I don't have the time. I don't have time to prospect. It's always that activity that gets pushed down on my list because I get pulled in a lot of different directions. And, I know how I try to grapple with that with people, but sometimes I'm not sure if I'm getting through. How would you tell someone who says, I get it, it makes sense, but I just don't have the time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question, Carson, because we can't control, there's only 24 hours in a day. We don't have this magical wizardry to go, oh, I'm going to make more time. That does not exist. So what I tell my kids, personal and professional, is that if it's important, you have to make the time. You have to allocate the time. And so what I mean by that is simple things like, imagine if we don't brush our teeth. I know that's weird. I mean, if you don't brush your teeth every day, I'm like, that's a personal thing for you. But I would say it's like, imagine habits, good habits that you got to go build, and imagine not brushing your teeth every day. That'd be kind of weird. And so I know maybe that's not the right analogy, but that's the analogy that just popped in my head, Carson. So when I think about using tools like prospecting and digital to create digital relationships, because in sales, or it doesn't matter, like we're all in sales. I would just say, Mariana, you have such a great point. We're all in sales. It's about relationships. And how do you build relationships? You have to build it not just face-to-face, and we proved it out during COVID. A huge opportunity. The sellers that were doing really well are the ones that adapted to prospecting digitally. The ones who didn't do so well is they relied on relationships, just hand-to-hand combat. You can't do that because we're now in a hybrid world. You have to be leveraging it. So I would just say, Carson, you if it's important and you feel like that's going to add value, you find ways to make that time, and then it becomes a habit. Then becomes consistency. That's what I was referencing.
And I want to sit on that for a second too, because here's the thing: we've talked a lot about like what does social look like. You know, just because we make profound posts doesn't mean somebody's going to send us a purchase order or somebody's going to say, "Hey, let's break bread." What actually happens is you can pick different mediums and different styles that you're comfortable with. And it's kind of like a stock portfolio. You run a very differentiated portfolio. Something I love about you too, Brian, and I'd love to get your take on this. You've got a newsletter as well. You build community around what you do. And I think I encourage people all the time, find different mediums that you're comfortable with and run a differentiated portfolio. Your platform's not going to look like mine, and it doesn't need to. Find what we're comfortable with. What would you say, folks that are kind of getting started in this, what should they be thinking about as far as their portfolio, and what led you to doing your newsletter?
Yeah. Oh, it's a great question, Carson. I would say that it's baby steps. Like the one thing is, as you mentioned, like if you want to, let's say, run a marathon. I personally have never done that. I would love to one day. You can't do that on day one. It is sequencing of steps for anyone who's run a marathon. To sequence of steps to get to that point. And so where you're at, where I'm at, where Brandon's at, where Tom's at, we're at kind of like when you think about Microsoft terms. I know I'm maybe using Microsoft terms. You think about level 100, level 200, level 300, and 400. I know those terms. Like if you're a Microsoft person on the phone, you probably know what that means. And so I always say start with level 100, and it really starts with who are you trying to have a conversation with. Like we all like Carson's in healthcare. So I love what you said. Your experience you're providing to your connections and relationships are going to be slightly different than what I do in my role leading our global Dynamics business application business. Similar, but different. So you then have to think about, okay, before I do any of this stuff and start doing all these things, the thing I always encourage sellers to do, and it was interesting how many people and it's no offense to people on this phone. When I looked at the number of attendees from Microsoft, what really caught my attention were two things. One, I was shocked at how many people don't have their picture public. I'm like, oh, it makes me cringe because when you meet someone for the very first time, I see you're smiling, Brandon. It's like, imagine you walk into a room as a seller and you have a paper bag on your head. That's the analogy I've always given. It's like, that's what you're doing. And unless you're in the CIA, or I get it. Like people have said, Brian, I'm in a very super secretive thing. I'm like, I totally get it. Then I'm not your target. I mean, in general, that's not really, then you'd be using LinkedIn for what it's intended to go do. So my first thing is like, you have to start with the basics. And the basics are, you have to make sure you have a very strong, what I call buyer-centric, resource-centric profile. It can't be a resume. It can't be, oh, I am the number one blah, blah, blah that hit all these things. I mean, you can do that, but you have to have some credibility to show that why you have that authority and what's in it for them. So for you, Carson, I love it because you talk about you're great at articulating the value to why people want to go talk to you and your team. And you have resources that allow people to understand that. And the subtle difference, and this is my thing when I first started out and really started to use LinkedIn, I just talked about my accolades. That's all I did. And then I got a comment from someone at LinkedIn, even a buyer, and said, Brian, like, I didn't want to talk to you because you just were trying to sell me something. And that was like an eye opener going, yes, I'm trying to do that. However, My job is to educate you on why you want to buy from me. What is the value that I can bring? And so going back to it, the one thing as all, like, I want to make sure when people leave this call, there's simple takeaways you can do. So if you can test out your profile, and it's as simple as going in and making sure your picture's public. Like, it cannot be shown to just your connections. It can't be shown privately. It's not Facebook. This is your professional profile, personal branding. You want to be seen because people buy from people. Like, I know what Tom looks like. I know what Brandon looks like. I know what Carson looks like. How does that happen? Because we've never met each other handshake to handshake. Is they see you visually, digitally. The second is that you have to, as I mentioned, you have to provide your profile so that, bottom line, when someone goes to your profile and says, oh, what does Carson do? What does Brandon do? What does Tom do? They immediately can go, will this allow me to understand why, if Carson reached out to me, is there something in there that says, yeah, that prompts me, like, he's posting really super interesting things, and his profile alludes me to things that I can learn about that is interesting to me. That's how you start to attract the type of people. Then you can start using LinkedIn Sales Navigator, using newsletters, creator mode. We'll probably get to that in this conversation. That's when then you start going from level 100 to level 400, but you can't skip the steps in between. People think, I'm just going to get to Carson and go, I'm going to do all the things that Carson does. I'm like, time out. You got to evaluate what your strategy is, who your target audience is, and then from there, build that foundation that gets you to where you're at, where I'm at, where Brandon's at, where Tom's at.
Brilliant.
Well, I think it's a good goal for all of us to shoot to be like Carson. So we should definitely put that in for our
Aim
thing.
higher.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, Brian, real quick before we leave there, you mentioned the newsletter. Is that a LinkedIn newsletter you're doing, or is that a different newsletter, like through email or some different way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's super fascinating, Tom, that you asked that question. And Carson, thanks for bringing that up, because I'm not perfect. Like, people think, oh my gosh, you're doing all these amazing things, Brian. Like, you must be a rock star expert. I'm like, yes, but no, because I'm learning. I mean, there's other people like from you guys that I'm like,
well, you're a newbie, like all of us. Yeah, you're a newbie.
We're all newbies. I would say I'm still a newbie, because things like, I haven't done a podcast. And when you guys behind the scenes were like putting this on a podcast and all this stuff, I'm like, what a missed opportunity for me. I have all this stuff that I do to showcase our partners, but I don't take the time to then put that into another medium to showcase that value. So I'm saying that because when you think about newsletters, if you have creator mode turned on, and we could talk about that if there's going to be a question to unpack that. But just know that if you are a seller or really want to take advantage of the LinkedIn experience, I encourage everyone to turn creator mode on, because it unlocks so much goodness and value, not just analytics, but things that it says at the top. Like, I know Carson has creator mode on. I think Tom and you, Brandon, have it turned on. I have it turned on. You'll see at the very top, it then highlights what are things I talk about. So I talk about partnerships. I talk about dynamics. I talk about social and leadership. It immediately gravitates so that search engine optimization and things, when people are trying to find stuff, guess what? You're going to be a profile that pops up naturally without anyone doing anything. The second is when you turn creator mode on, there are certain things like LinkedIn Live, like the stuff we're doing today right now. You couldn't do that as a seller to create this medium. If you choose to do what your guys are doing, I like Carson does, I do the same thing. I have my own show that I do every Monday called ISV Connect Live that showcases ISVs. Then to what Carson's perspective is, the other thing that I do is every Friday, something that is Microsoft related, but also personal, is what I call Thank Goodness It's Friday. And who doesn't want to have, oh my gosh, it's Friday. So let me do a quick read of stuff. What I found valuable when I first started, I think, oh, who's going to really read it? I have over 2,500 people that have subscribed to that newsletter without me doing anything. It just naturally happens. And so that's not just the people that follow my profile. That now is people subscribe to that newsletter, so that regardless of LinkedIn or not, because they subscribe to that newsletter on LinkedIn, they'll see that feed. But in addition to that, and Carson knows this, well, Brandon and Tom, you've probably seen it because I think we got connected last week. You get an email with the LinkedIn summary on a newsletter, and you see everything that's happening. And so it's a way to stay connected. And we're probably going to get to content, and I'll talk about it in more details. But again, it's how you want to drive the conversation with your buyers or the people you're trying to engage with or create a relationship. It's consistency of message. So whatever you want to talk about, you have to be consistent about it, and it has to add value. It can't just be, oh, I don't know, whatever it is. We're all humans. And so people say, Brian, why do you put pictures of your family? Why do you put pictures? Like, I was on sabbatical. Carson knows this. I was very grateful because of my level. And at the time I'd been at Microsoft, I was afforded the opportunity to take 2 months off, fully paid, and not have to worry about work. During that experience, people have asked me, hey, Brian, are you still going to do LinkedIn stuff? I'm like, yes and no. I'm not going to be as active. I'm not going to do my videos. But what I will do is every Friday, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to create a newsletter that's going to showcase personal things that I'm doing and learning during my sabbatical. There are so many people when I came back that said, oh my gosh, Brian, that was amazing, because I got to know you even more as a human, but I also got to know you as, what do you care about? What are you interested in? Like, people got to know, oh my gosh, you're a big college football fan, huge Oregon Duck fan. You had spent time with your friends at a beach. You took a cruise on Disney. Oh, hey, how do I go on? It creates the conversation that then allows for other stuff to happen. And Carson is spot on. Selling is relationships. Selling is trust. And if you don't build that personal trust, you're just selling a thing. And granted, it could be a commodity, but in general, if you want to be a really successful seller, the thing you have to turn on is that you have to build relationships. Whether that person's going to buy now or buy a year from now or buy 5 years from now, the stronger connections that are built are the ones that are long-standing. Not it, hey, can you buy this today? You buy it and then you go away.
You know, it's interesting, Brian and Brandon. I know we've got some really good comments we want to share here, but what you're talking about, and even what you're doing with the newsletter, you know, there's a lot of talk now, especially in the marketing world, about how do you create demand, right? You have to create demand with your prospects, and everything you're talking about inherently creates demand, not only for your company but for yourself and your role, right? So it's one thing to create demand for your company or your product, but it's something else to create demand for yourself. And when you're doing that, when you're sharing all of those things, and then people just reach out and want to do business with you. Brandon, what was that? Sorry, the comment I just saw there for a second.
I want to back up. There you go.
Yeah. So
I love Jessica's comment. I mean, I think that thing, and thank you, Jessica, for being vulnerable. We struggle. We're humans. We struggle with a lot of stuff. And sometimes it is okay to open that up because it's relatability. It's commonality. And so when you relate to people, that's where interesting conversations come up. The one thing that I'll add to that, Jessica, and anybody else listening, is that one of the things that people, and I made this I don't know if it's a mistake, but I made the trap of, it can't be a one-way conversation. So what I mean by that is, when someone posts something, or like, let's say you post something, the thing that you have to do is you have to have an engaging digital dialogue. Because a lot of people post a lot of stuff, but what happens? They post a lot of stuff. You see people commenting in the thread, and I always find it very shocking and surprising that the person who created the initial post, they don't come back and engage in a dialogue. I made that mistake, or they just like it and I get it, like quick response. But if you really want to have the quality of the engagement, and to Jessica, your point, like, how do you drive the connection points and being able to engage, is that you create this digital connection. So all of a sudden, your Brandon's name pops up, Tom's name pops up, Carson's name pops up, because you engage in other people's content, so that then it starts to attract the conversation. And then people are curious, go, what does Tom do? What does Brandon do? Because if you're showing up on my feed, I guarantee you someone's going to go, wait a second, I've never seen Tom and Brandon. They don't work at Microsoft. What do they do? That creates the connection and opportunity, because then they're going to be attracted to Tom and Brandon and go, oh my gosh, Tom and Brandon do a lot of stuff around social selling for newbies. Maybe I need to learn more, and it creates opportunity for you. So
yeah, no, totally right. And it creates that goodwill. It creates interest. It creates a lot of those things, which is, again, a side effect that I think sometimes we don't talk about. You know, Brandon, we talk a lot about this when we talk about kind of the framework or the methodology for social selling is, yeah, there's outreach, and yeah, there's all the relationship building, but at the same time, we're creating demand for ourselves and our company, and we're helping the buyer, enable the buyer journey for them to be more successful. So it's kind of a win-win-win all the way around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge it. I think Carson went back to the future or something. He just disappeared on us. I got a message saying I think he's trying to get back in, but
all of a sudden I saw some flames going across the screen. I don't know if that had something to do with it or not.
Yeah, I think it hit what is that? 60,
whatever. Yeah.
65. There he is. So he 70 mile per hour.
We didn't know if you went back to the future or not. So
I think I did. I time traveled.
Yeah.
Now, this has been great stuff. And look, I was listening the whole time. I just was having a little technical difficulty. But what I think is interesting that you said earlier, Brian, that I really want to double down on is your approach isn't perfect. And I think that's where a lot of us will put pressure on ourselves to say, like, right out of the gates, we've got to be, way down the track with this. And it's, I always tell people, like, look, come up with your strategy, be intentional about your audience, find these mediums that you're comfortable with. Maybe not everybody's comfortable with video. Maybe not everybody's comfortable with the newsletter, but just take some steps forward and learn and tinker. What would you say have been some of the biggest lessons and learnings that you've had? Like where maybe something didn't work, or maybe you tweaked something and then it did. Like, I'd love to hear more about your journey and like what you've tried.
Yeah, absolutely, Carson. So my team knows the phrase I like to use is progress versus perfection. We all get to a point where, like, oh my gosh, it has to be perfect out of the box. And then you're trying to perfect it and you never get anything done. The thing for me is that you have to make progress and take baby steps. I mean, to your point, Carson. And so it was really enlightening to me because, to your point, everyone says, oh, I use LinkedIn. And when I really look at it and go, oh my gosh, you're just scratching the surface, kind of like I was. I had an amazing opportunity because even before we acquired LinkedIn, and you know this, Carson, because you've been at Microsoft too, is that we use LinkedIn Sales Navigator. We didn't even use initially LinkedIn Sales Navigator. We were a pilot before we even acquired LinkedIn. And I was one of those sellers in the field that was handpicked because someone going, Brian, I think there's that this guy in Dynamics that really likes using LinkedIn. Let's get him Sales Navigator to really start to use it. And that engagement, kind of what I was mentioning, Carson, I was guilty of being very resume focused, not resource or buyer centric. That was the number one thing that I learned very quickly. Like, I got to change my profile. So I'm not looking for a job. I mean, I'm happy with what I'm doing at Microsoft. So that little tweak to say, Brian, like, turn it to buyer centric was such an enlightening thing and a journey for me to know that. The second one was kind of what I was talking about. Because we're creators. You can say you're influencers and all that stuff. There's all these terms flying around. I like the term creator because content is so important, like valuable content and unique things like this, things that, and it's no offense to people in marketing, but this type of conversation is so valuable because it's authentic, real human conversation versus it's scripted. You say something, I say something. This is overall conversation. So what I learned is that you have, to your point, have to find different mediums. Was I perfect? If you watch my video of ISV Connect Live, number 1 to, I don't know what it is. I think I'm on 65 or 70. I don't know what it is. Night and day difference. Like, and I didn't know what to do. Like, I was really uncomfortable. Like right now, being able to stare at a camera and naturally do that, it was so unnatural for me because I'm comfortable presenting like you in front of large audiences, small audiences. I wasn't initially comfortable with presenting to people looking at a camera. That's weird. It's kind of awkward because no one else is in the room. I mean, my dog is, well, she's not in the room anymore, but my dog hears all these conversations I'm having, but it's not interaction with people. You have to stare at a camera. And so I would say, to your point, I love it, Carson, because this is a journey. So when you think of, like I mentioned, a marathon, using an analogy, you don't win the marathon in a minute. It is a constant journey where you have milestone checkpoints. And I think the critical takeaway too is you got to surround yourself with people that can help you on that journey. So what you did with Brandon and Tom, however this relationship got connected, it's great because you have people holding you accountable to really refine your craft. And so when you find other people that can help you through that journey, you latch on to them and say, hey, you know what? I love to, it's like mentorship or sponsorship. Same thing. I know you know those terms because we use those terms here at Microsoft. You have to have the right mentors and sponsors to, if you want to go do this, great. There's going to be plenty of people that can help you do that. You have to be very clear and intentional, to your point, on what you want to get out of it and ensure that then when you have to be open to feedback. If someone say, hey, you know what, please change this on your profile. I always cringe when I give that feedback and they say, I want to make all these changes. And then I look at their profile a month later, they haven't changed it. And I'm like, okay, that means to say that I'm not perfect in what my recommendations are, but I think I know, I've been doing this for a while like you, where I think I know what are things that you should be doing to just like having your profile picture public. When I always cringe when I see sellers and I give them that feedback and then a month later, still haven't done it. And
That
so
is amazing. What you just said about being open to feedback. I got a gut punch a couple of years ago. Somebody called me out for being lazy. I was posting a lot of third-party articles and just being lazy, and they were right. And so I started just posting stuff that I created myself or with people, and posting things that were, more about me personally, and night and day difference. And I'd love
Yeah.
to understand too, Brian, what are the tools in your tool bag? Because I think the other thing is I don't discriminate against any tool that could create a relationship if my target audience might be there. I even started dabbling in TikTok to the chagrin of my teenager. Like if there's a video that can create a conversation out there, great. So like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, like what are your tools in the tool bag?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that question, Carson. So I would say that, of course, LinkedIn, number one thing. Like if you're a seller on this phone call, I know everyone has a LinkedIn profile, but really make sure that we're talking about LinkedIn and Sales Navigator. There's a difference. So at Microsoft, if you're from a Microsoft seller and you don't have a Sales Navigator license, talk to your manager and say, how do I get one? Because you're missing out. You need to have not just LinkedIn, but you need to have a Sales Navigator license. Then on top of those two tools, then of course, for us, as you know, because you're in it all day, Dynamics, that's a tool that has to be used because I get it. Like as a seller, no one likes to enter data, but if you organize it and structure it in a way, I know this is going outside of social selling, but you need tools to help you organize who you're going to go after and how you prioritize what you work on. The one thing that I always am shocked at what new sellers do is they go, I'm going to sell to everybody. I'm like, no, you're not. You're going to get your account like you did, Carson, to your team. You're going to have a list of accounts. You're going to say, okay, I know you're an enterprise, so I don't know how many accounts someone has. Typically, they'll probably have maybe 5 or whatever. So they get that list, and when someone says, I'm going to sell to all 5, I'm like, okay, great. What are you going to sell? And you're going to rank one or the other because of where they're at in their maturity. You have to utilize tools like CRM. Of course, we're biased, Carson and I, because we're Dynamics. But whatever that CRM is, you have to make sure you're utilizing it so you can effectively manage your time. Then I love how you said Twitter. Because people think, oh, what, Brian? Why would I waste my time on Twitter? Guess what? Like you got to think about whether it's Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is. Whatever you sell, if you find your buyers have profiles or engagement occurring on that social platform, you have to be on it because you have to be listening. The one thing about selling, no matter your role, you have to be listening. If you're a good listener, and you're seeing signals, and that's why Sales Navigator, we'll talk about, hopefully there's time. I want to make sure people understand the value and the amazing things that Sales Navigator does. It's so important as a seller to listen to signals or partner, like I'll just use it too, because I know I encourage my people in the partner channel and the partners. This is not just a selling conversation. This is also partnerships. You have to be listening for signals that then determine how do you then do your outreach? When do you do your outreach? What's the hook? If Carson reached out to me, he's like, okay, well, who's Carson? Why would I care? But if Carson added value, utilized a warm connection of some sort or commonality that made me read it and go, oh my gosh, this is interesting. Oh, and here's a warm connection that got me into the conversation. More often than not, again, no guarantees. I don't like putting guarantees, but high probability. It's better than sending a mass amount of email that a lot of sellers traditionally do. They go, okay, woo, I have 1,000 emails in here. I'm going to create a Word template that's going to send, hi, Carson, hi, Tom, hi, Brandon, with the exact same content. I'm like, please don't do that because 1, that's spam. 2, that's no value. Like you're not selling value. You're just trying to get someone on the hook. This takes time. The one thing to your point, Carson, there are no shortcuts in sales. Like if you think there is, like good for you. Like you might be in the right place, right time. But in general, as Carson and Tom and Brandon can attest to, sales takes work. It takes hard effort. It's not as easy as people think. If you do the work, you do it consistently, you're going to become a much better seller and go across the people who are just average.
Well, and if you do the work, right, but your probabilities are higher, you're reaching more people, you're getting more out of that work that you're putting in, right? So you're absolutely right. It's not a factor of not hard work, but what do you get out of that work? And Brian, we've talked a lot on this show and other shows about, some of Carson's successes. And Carson, you've talked about literally, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that you have generated from social that you wouldn't have generated otherwise. Brian, looking at it through the lens of what you're doing, which is more through the partner side, what would you say your successes or your outcomes have been by using this approach versus not? Like, what are some wins and successes that we can all, build on?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to get to your comment, Susan, because I think your comment is super valuable. So please hold that thought, because I do want to comment on that. It's such a great comment you made. So I would say, Tom and Brandon, and Carson knows this too, because Carson has gotten accolades for his work as well. So before I took this partner role, we have a very prestigious award that's given to less than 1% of the Microsoft organization, sellers, non-sellers, etc., which is called Circle of Excellence Platinum Club. I was very fortunate and grateful I got that recognition. And why did that? Yeah, there you go. And Carson's pointing at it too. So we're an exclusive club. And why did that happen? Not only if you're a good seller and you crush your numbers, of course, you're going to get it. My route is slightly, and granted, I got it in a selling role, but mine isn't as cut and dry as when Carson got it, because I have a number to attain, but mine was changing something so valuable in Microsoft. When we acquired LinkedIn and, of course, Sales Navigator and Dynamics, how do you put the two together? That was such an enlightening opportunity for me in growth, because I really got to understand, and that's why I wanted to make a comment, Susan, with Sales Navigator, because using all these tools creates an ability for you to create people to come to you. So what probably happens with Carson, and I'm sure the stories he's told has alluded to it. For me, it's the exact same thing. People always are curious, like, oh my gosh, Brian, like, it seems like you're very visible, which is what you want. You want to be visible in a good way. Not that, oh, I'm publishing things about cats, or like things about Brian as authority in biz apps and partnerships. That's the moniker that people see publicly, which is good, because what ends up happening, if done correctly, is that all this hard work, when as sellers, we chase down people to try to have a conversation with us. So imagine if you flip that in reverse, and that's happened. That happens currently. I for privacy, I don't want to show my messaging feed, but the number of times, people looking at my profiles from people that we want to attract, I've never talked to them before, but I'm like, that seems like an interesting partner. They're looking at my profile, never met them before. Why? It's because consistency in messaging, and when people engage in the content, somehow they see it. The other one that, again, it's not really a secret, but that's why you want to be visible with authentic and unique content. So when we do the ISV Connect live show every Monday, we highlight an ISV, either one that's in our space for a while or a new one. I like to highlight new ones, because new ones, as Carson can imagine, when you're a new partner, it is so hard to get the attention of a Microsoft person. Yeah. Because they're like, oh my gosh, you're one of 1,000 of partners. Like, why would I work with you? So because they're being hosted on the show, it gives them at least a starting opportunity to get their name recognized. I'm sharing that story because a couple things happen. One, it creates opportunity, because I mentioned recruiting. One of you mentioned that one of the accountabilities my team has is recruiting. So imagine if we showcase a partner and their competitor sees that they're now part of the Microsoft ecosystem, and they're seeing, oh my gosh, that partner is now getting early success. Guess what happens? They raise their hand and go, wait a second. I saw your episode, Brian, that this thing, we do that. How do I start the conversation? That has happened, I don't know how many times, because of just the work that our team does to highlight that. The other thing that happens is Carson knows, because Carson's been at Microsoft for a long time as well. Because of the relationships we establish within Microsoft, that's so valuable, because then when all the connections I have at Microsoft, when they watch my show, it prompts them to go, wait a second, that's a scenario. And it's not healthcare related, but they're going to go, wait a second, Brian just showcased this partner. I have that problem that I'm trying to address. And then you're creating, and Carson summed it super well, you're creating communities. In sales, it's a village. It takes a village. If you're a lone wolf, good at you. In sales, the effective sales are going to be the sellers are going to, or in partners, are the ones that establish very strong networks all over the place. And I know, Brandon, you talked about like being prepared for movies. One of the movies that I love is the Glengarry Glen Ross. I think all of us as sellers, we know what that is. What do we know? What's one of the terms they use? ABC. I have a different flavor on what ABC means. It doesn't mean always be closing. Yes, that's true. You have to be doing that. My version of that is always be connecting. You have to, as a seller or a partner, whatever it is, you have to be connecting with people all the time. And so what happened when all of a sudden Carson joined this thing, and what did I do? I said, hey, Carson, this is amazing. So I started following this social selling for newbies. I commented on the comment, and Carson said, oh, and I said, hey, if you ever want a guest, I'd be happy to go do it. And guess what happened? Created this opportunity.
We are.
And then because I saw what you, Brandon, and Tom were doing, I was paying attention. I'm like, oh, this is super interesting. So what did I do? I sent a personalized, and then let me repeat that. Personalized connection. I know I'm jumping ahead, but bouncing around. But the one thing, when you think about LinkedIn, it cannot be generic. You can't just come out with a profile that has a generic background. You have to have something that catches someone's attention, have a professional picture, have something that's relatable. And when you send a connection request, like I did, Brandon, to you and Tom, you can't just hit connect with nothing. Because then I see the name going, okay, you probably would have accepted it because Carson showed my name. But more often than not, we're all busy. Someone's name's going to pop up, and I get that all the time. And apologize. People who sent me connection requests during this live show, just remember, next time you go send a connection request, make sure you personalize it, because that creates the connection point.
It sets a tone, right?
But before that, we'd love to get your thoughts, Brandon, Tom, and Carson.
Well, I think just on the connection request like that, it sets a tone, right? You send a connection request, or you just push the button. It speaks a lot without saying anything specific to it, right? You just click the button. Mm-hmm. But taking the time and doing a little research, saying something relevant, saying Absolutely. Something about where hey, we both commented on this post and it got me looking at your profile, or anything like that. It just brings that humanity to it. And I think that lack of humanity is what's so much missing from sales right now.
Bingo. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I know we're running out of time a little bit here, but I wanted to wrap up with something. And one interesting point that Brian and Brandon, you were just talking about, is when you start doing this, you start getting inbound, right? You get your own inbound.
That's right.
And, everybody wants inbound, right? Because that's where you capture demand versus creating the demand is when that comes into you. But as we wrap up here, and I know, gosh, we could definitely probably talk for the next couple hours on all of this. And I'm going to ask all of you, right? Real quickly, what do you see as the future of social in terms of, and I guess you could look at it through different lens, right? It could be from a technology perspective, but it could also just be, how do you see this as becoming, where instead of talking about social selling, it's just the way selling's done, right?
Yes.
Is it just become, what do we see as the future of what we're considering or calling today social selling?
I could kick off and start. I would say you'll see some of my colleagues on the LinkedIn side use this term deep selling. And I thought about it, I'm like, that's a really interesting comment. Or the comment I used to use is turn relationships into revenue. Because to Carson's point, it's all about relationships. So I would say, I would put it in three different vernaculars, Tom. I would say one is that you have to use the right tools, including social, to identify your ideal target buyer. So all these people making comments on Sales Navigator, that's the best tool to go navigate that, to understand who are the target roles in your accounts that you are accountable for, to understand why to have a conversation, when to have a conversation, etc. It's such a goldmine, as someone mentioned. The second is you have to then utilize those signals. And what I call signals, that could happen in LinkedIn, that could happen in Dynamics, it could happen in a whole bunch of tools. You as a seller have to be processing all these signals to then understand when to have the right conversation, and then the best path to reach a decision maker. And that's why Sales Navigator, again, goldmine. If you're not using Sales Navigator, it's mind blowing. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're a seller and you have access to Sales Navigator, you don't use it. When I'll use the term Team Link. Again, we don't have the time to go talk about it, but if you're not using Team Link, and if you're a Microsoft person and me saying Team Link, you have no idea what that means, please contact me, because you're missing out. And Carson can appreciate that, because relationships are driven by who knows who. And if you get a warm connection, let's say Carson was a decision maker and Tom, you knew him, and I got the connection to Carson through you, and you created a connection for me to have that meeting. Guess what the likelihood of Carson taking that meeting? Much higher than me randomly spamming Carson, say, hey, my name is Brian. I'd like to talk to you about dynamics, which I've seen that email go before. And I'm like, please don't do that. That just is click. And then the last one is they have to act on those insights for buyer intent so that they can then initiate the relevant and personalized conversation because they see buyer intent.
Yeah, Carson, would you agree with that? I mean, what he's touching on obviously is using data and intent signals and all of that for us to even raise that probability yet another level, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're basically hitting all of my key talking points from prior shows. I mean, I love this. It's almost like we did script it, which we didn't. Social selling is just selling. I mean, that's the not so hidden secret here. And I'm going to quote another movie here because this is what these social selling tools enable us to do. It's that information is the greatest commodity. So let's go to Wall Street, right? Yeah. The most valuable commodity is information. And thanks to these tools, we can do the social listening that Brian was talking about, when to act, who to reach out to, what to say, and you enhance your probability by focusing on the warmth of relationship. If I know someone who knows the person I'm reaching out to, probability is high. If not, then I've got to focus on quality of message and value delivered. But the future of social selling is it's selling, and it's using all of these wonderful things in the toolkit in order to stand out, establish your brand, and find your audience. Wherever your audience is, you've got to be there. And so whatever the platform is 5-10 years from now, you better believe I'll be there.
Awesome. Brandon, take us home. What's your take? Just real quick.
How do I follow that? How do I follow that?
Really.
Look, not so much to speak to the future, because I think they did a great job. I think the way that we get to the future is, and they both alluded to it in different ways or spoke to it in different ways. Starting to realize that social selling isn't any different than selling, right? It's just different, right? It's we did our research, and even if you go back to like when I started in sales in the 90s and I had my routes, I had a cadence. I'd go meet, I'd go knock on doors, I'd take the donuts, I'd take the bagels, I'd go, hey, I got tickets for the ball game, whatever it was. Didn't show up and sell. You didn't show up the first time and pull out the brochure and the flyer. They're like, hey, I just want to show up and introduce myself, get to know you. Like, when we get back to that as the foundation, it's a whole new lens for social selling. We just got to get back to that. And then all these things that these smart guys have just talked about all makes a lot more sense. But we got to get away from that pounding people to sell.
That's right.
Completely.
Yeah.
So,
and yes, Dave, I could probably pull in a Back to the Future reference there. I'm going to have to shift my thinking all of a sudden, relate everything to Back to the Future.
Well, we need to make like a tree and get out of here pretty quickly here. So, but you led in well, Brandon, for our next show next week. Our next title of our show next week is Nothing Has Changed, Everything Is Just Different. And I think you just alluded to that. And we're going to get into more of that next week. Brian, really appreciate you being here today. Obviously, we can see on LinkedIn. Yeah. But is there any other place
There's
that you would
another
like people
movie
to connect
reference.
with you, or is LinkedIn?
We're not worthy.
Thank you. Jeez. I would just say thank you, team, for Carson. First off, thank you for all the good work you do. I love what you do to amplify that. I think if we can spread this message, not just with Microsoft, but everyone else, I mean, it's going to elevate the profession of selling and change the perception of we're not used car salesmen. We are adding value. I think the other one would be that if you're a Microsoft seller, again, we're part of the Give campaign. So a selfish plug, I do have 2 auction items for LinkedIn profile makeover that if you're a seller and you want to take advantage of that and take my time, where I will give you one-to-one coaching, giving back to a good cause, go into the Microsoft auction site and find my name. And there are 2 items there.
I've got one out there too. Coaching session.
Yes. And sorry. Yeah. Carson has one too. So take advantage of that. And
are those only for Microsoft people, or is that open?
Yes.
Okay.
It is only for Microsoft people.
I was going to take you up on it.
Hey, if somebody else wants to donate to a worthy cause, I'm happy to coach them too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't have to be Microsoft related. If you want to say, hey, I'll donate to a worthy cause for a time, Carson or myself, we want to spread the love of how this works.
You know, that's
thing
an
is,
awesome gesture. I think that's an awesome gesture that Brandon, we need to keep pushing on here especially as we get into the holiday season here. I think that's
yeah, we got to turn that into a theme. Good call, guys. Sorry,
Yeah.
Brian, go ahead, wrap us
yeah,
up.
no, it's okay. Yeah, and the last one is I'm writing a book. So Carson is already way ahead of me, but I'm writing a book on it. So stay tuned. It's going to be probably released sometime in 2023, and it'll be an opportunity for someone who, again, new to sales or been at it for a long time. A lot of these little things, nuggets that I was sharing is a very methodical thing that allows someone to, again, create the foundation to get to where they need to be. So my big takeaway for everyone on the phone, thank you for making the time to learn. That's half the starting point, is just to be vulnerable and go, you know what? I can be better at this, and be consistent. So when you have a thought as to how you're going to go to do it and be consistent about it and learn from it and adjust. You can't just be, oh, I did all the things and it's not working.
Yeah.
Then evaluate and adjust based upon what needs to happen.
to keep attending the show every week, because we'll help you adjust along the way. So, right. and speaking of that, be sure to follow the Social Selling for Newbies LinkedIn page. Yes. I know we're seeing rapid growth in that, and we appreciate that. And also we have a podcast as well. So we would love it if you would go to iTunes or wherever you go for your podcast and subscribe, give a rating or whatever. But yeah, and you mentioned earlier, right, to really kind of change the perception of sales and the dignity of the profession. That's a big passion of why we're doing this. And you know, so as much as we can spread the word and get it out there, anyway, we'd appreciate if anybody can grab the podcast and subscribe and leave us a rating and follow the page. That's really appreciated. So, all right. Well, thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next week, same time. And we'll have to come up with some good new movie trivia for next week. Brandon, we'll have to find out some of the other movies you've been in so we can spotlight those as well.
Growing pains.
Yeah, that's right.
That'll be the new sign off. We'll see you in the future.
In the future. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Social selling.
I love it. Thank you, gents. Thank you, everyone.